In the spring of 1942, the United Kingdom was transformed into the largest unsinkable aircraft carrier in human history. Over 1.5 million American servicemen poured into the British Isles in what became known as the Friendly Invasion. For the first time, the modern American citizen soldier was forced into close, daily proximity with the military apparatus of the British Empire. As the American GIs observed their British counterparts, a profound sense of sociological confusion took root. The United States Army and the British Army were ostensibly fighting for the same cause, using similar weapons and developing combined grand strategies. But internally, they operated on completely alien psychological architectures. To the American observer, the British Army appeared to be a deeply flawed, archaic relic of a feudal class system. The American military philosophy was built on the concept of fraternal leadership. The ideal American officer was a citizen soldier, a former mechanic, teacher, or farmer who had gone to officer candidate school and earned his bars through merit. American lieutenants were expected to dig their own foxholes, eat the same terrible sea rations as their men, and lead by physical, visible example. The American doctrine was essentially, "I will never ask you to do something I won't do myself." When these egalitarian Americans looked at a British infantry battalion, they were appalled. The British officer corps was heavily populated by the aristocracy and the upper middle class, men educated at elite public schools like Eton and Harrow. They spoke with refined, upper-class accents that sounded entirely foreign to the working-class soldiers of London, Liverpool, or Glasgow. Worse, to the American eye, the British maintained a rigid physical and social separation between the ranks. British officers had separate, superior mess halls. They were issued different rations. They drank in exclusive clubs, and incredibly, they were assigned enlisted soldiers known as batmen to act as their personal servants, shining their boots, making their tea, and laying out their uniforms. To an American farm boy from Iowa or a factory worker from Detroit, this looked like a recipe for absolute military disaster. How could a man fight and die for a commanding officer who treated him like a second-class citizen? The American operational assumption was simple. When the bullets started flying, this aristocratic system would shatter. Without the fraternal, brother-in-arms bond between the officer and the enlisted man, the British units would inevitably paralyze and dissolve. But then came the brutal campaigns of North Africa, the grinding mountains of Italy, and the blood-soaked beaches of Normandy. The Americans watched, baffled, as these class-divided British units absorbed catastrophic casualties, held impossible defensive lines, and executed vicious assaults with a stubborn, terrifying efficiency. The Americans couldn't explain how the British soldiers fought so well without the fraternal officers the U.S. Army deemed essential. It was because the Americans were looking through an egalitarian lens, completely missing the twin pillars of the British military soul: the unmatched authority of the warrant officer and the tribal religion of the regiment. The fundamental American misunderstanding stemmed from the role of the officer himself. In the United States Army, an officer was expected to be both the tactical visionary and the hands-on manager of the men. He was the CEO and the floor manager combined. The British Army operated on a completely different corporate structure. The British officer was the executive. He was expected to display unflinching physical courage, understand grand strategy, read the map, and direct the artillery, but he was actively discouraged from micromanaging the men. That was not his job. The day-to-day survival, discipline, and tactical execution of the British soldier were the exclusive domain of the non-commissioned officer, NCO, specifically the sergeant major. If the British officer was the architect who designed the building, the sergeant major was the foreman who drove the nails. While American officers often prided themselves on being one of the guys, the British sergeant major was something closer to a demigod. This class of senior NCOs, often holding the unique rank of warrant officer, were hardened, career professionals who had spent decades in the military. They were usually drawn from the exact same working-class backgrounds as the enlisted men. But through sheer competence, brutality, and experience, They had ascended to a level of absolute battlefield authority. When an American unit came under heavy machine gun fire, the men looked to their lieutenant to yell, "Follow me." When a British unit came under that same fire, the young, aristocratic lieutenant would identify the target and calmly order the attack. But it was the company sergeant major who physically grabbed the men by their webbing, kicked them out of the ditch, and orchestrated the violence. The Americans couldn't understand how the British fought without their officers, because they didn't realize the British didn't need their officers for tactical momentum. If a British captain was killed by a mortar shell, the tactical map might briefly pause, but the brutal, mechanical execution of the battle didn't skip a beat. The sergeant major simply took the reins, operating the company with the ruthless efficiency of a man who had done it 1,000 times before. But discipline and NCO leadership only explained part of the phenomenon. The second element that completely eluded American observers was the profound psychological anchor of the British regimental system. The United States Army was a massive, relatively homogenized industrial machine. Soldiers were drafted, sent to vast training camps in states they had never visited, and assigned to numbered divisions: the 1st Infantry, the 101st Airborne, the 29th Division. You fought for your country, you fought for your buddy in the foxhole, and you fought to get the job done so you could go home. The British Army was not a single, homogenized machine. It was a collection of ancient, fiercely independent tribes. A British soldier did not just join the army. He was inducted into a specific, geographically rooted regiment: the Gordon Highlanders, the Royal Welch Fusiliers, the Green Howards. These regiments had continuous histories stretching back 300 years. They had fought at Waterloo, the Crimea, and the Somme. More importantly, they were recruited locally. A platoon in the British Army was often composed of men who had grown up on the exact same street in Manchester, whose fathers had served in the exact same regiment in World War I, and whose grandfathers had served in it before that. When a British soldier put the metal cap badge of his regiment on his beret, he was inheriting centuries of localized blood debt. This created an incredibly powerful socio-military dynamic that negated the need for an egalitarian officer. The British enlisted man did not necessarily love his aristocratic officer, and he didn't need the officer to be his friend. The Tommy wasn't fighting for the lieutenant's approval. He was fighting because to run away, to show cowardice, or to fail in his duty would bring permanent, unforgivable shame upon his regiment and his hometown. If he broke under fire, he wouldn't just be letting down the army. He would have to go back to his village in Yorkshire and look his neighbors in the eye, knowing he disgraced the badge his father wore. This combination of tribal loyalty and NCO dominance manifested flawlessly at the lowest tactical level. The American squad was a 12-man unit built around collective firepower, usually led by a sergeant who acted as a miniature platoon leader, constantly coordinating the entire group. The British equivalent was the 10-man section, commanded by a corporal. Because British doctrine separated the tactical thinker, the officer, from the tactical doer, the NCO, the British corporal was trained to be a highly autonomous operator. The American GI watched in awe as leaderless British sections executed textbook maneuvers. The aristocratic officer didn't need to be there holding their hands. The corporal knew exactly how to set up his Bren gun to lay down a base of fire. The rifleman knew exactly how to flank, not because a lieutenant inspired them, but because it was the mechanized drill drilled into them by their sergeants, and because the pride of their regiment demanded they do it without hesitation. Ultimately, the American confusion was a projection of their own cultural values onto an entirely different society. The United States produced an army that reflected its national mythology: democratic, fraternal, aggressively egalitarian, and bound by shared hardship from top to bottom. It was a brilliant, highly effective system. But they fundamentally misjudged the British Tommy. The Americans looked at the class divide, the batmen, and the separate mess halls, and saw weakness. They failed to see the hardened steel underneath. The British Army did not fight without leadership. They simply distributed it differently. They fought on a psychological operating system built on the absolute terror and respect of the sergeant major, and the unbreakable, ancient blood pride of the regimental cap badge. The Americans fought for each other and their officers. The British fought for their regiment, their mates, and the sheer, stubborn refusal to let a working-class corporal down while the officer was busy reading the map. Two completely different cultures, two completely different architectures of leadership, converging on the exact same bloody battlefields to break the back of the German war machine.